Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for coming out for the Professional Technical Employees Council and Executive Team Exchange of Views. I'm Barbara LaBranch, and I'm currently serving as your chair. And what I'd like to do is quickly, if we could go around the tables and have everyone introduce themselves. I know many are familiar with most of the people here, but I think it's good. So we'll start with May.
Welcome. My name is May Ashby. I'm the Associate Vice President for Human Resources.
Hi, I'm Kim Allen. I'm Communications Coordinator and also on the PTech board.
I'm Carla McCabe, Constituent Events Coordinator and also on the board.
My name is Bianca Smith. I'm Assistant Director of E-Services. I'm also on the board.
Good morning. I'm Rick Collins, and I'm the Interim Vice President for Business Operations and CFO.
Good morning. Dick Hammond, VP for IT.
Laura Ross, Vice President, Academic Affairs.
Georgia Lorenz, President of the college.
Kate Henry, VP Marketing Communications.
Johnny Craig, Vice President of Student Affairs.
Hello, I'm Sabrina Deschner. I'm the Manager of Communications and Employee Engagement, and I'm also on the PTech board.
And Ferry.
And Ferry. It's a night job. Oh my God. I clarified that.
James Miller. I am the Manager of Energy and Sustainability at the college, and I'm on the PTech board.
Chris Giddens, Assistant Director of Financial Aid and Treasurer on PTech. Secretary, whatever.
Ashley Maddox, Supervisor of Student Retention and Completion, and on the PTech board.
Michael McCurdy, Instructional Designer in e-learning, and on the PTech board as an ex officio as former PTech chair.
Thank you, everyone. Our co-chair, Shayla Harris, is en route to Tampa to chair another meeting, so she won't be with us this morning. I want to mention two things. Sabrina mentioned that she's a fairy. That's her nighttime job. Some of you may be aware that the play A Midsummer's Night Dream is going on this weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And of course, that is free to all faculty and staff here at Seminole State College. I've heard it's essentially Shakespeare on the lawn, so you should check it out. I heard it's been a really good show, so definitely check that out. The other thing is I want to give, before we launch into Dr. Lorenz's information regarding the Strategic Planning Summit that took place last Friday all day, I would like to give my perception of the event. First off, I've been involved with strategic planning initiatives on and off a few times, and I must say that last Friday was a great experience for me. How it was organized, the timing of everything, the discussions that we had around the topics that came out of the SOAR team reviews. I think most importantly, the ideas that were generated as a result of that, all of it was a really good experience. So if you were there, I hope you had the same perception as I. If you were not there over the course.
And review, and Mark Morgan is awesome at acronyms, so it was the SOAR team. And we met 6 times about different data that impacts the college in one way or the other. We looked at student achievement, demographics that may be changing over the next 10, 20 years, workforce trends, all of those things that the college really needs to respond to in our strategic plan. And out of that came 18 recommendations from that SOAR team that really framed the Strategic Planning Summit. And those fall into categories that are going to sound very familiar and sort of obvious to you. Students, employees, academic programs, student support, partnerships, and community engagement. So it's not like it's wildly different in terms of what we want to attend to as compared to our current strategic plan. Advanced teams during the Strategic Planning Summit day to take the recommendation and come up with a big wow idea, really focused on innovation and trying to think about the ways in which we can change how we work with students, how we design ourselves for students to promote student success as effectively and efficiently as we possibly can. So we really tried to push innovation and said, forget any constraints that we may have. What would you recommend to address, a particular recommendation? So let me see if I can look at one here. So there was one recommendation that actually responded to one WOW idea that responded to several recommendations to create sort of like a department called Future State. And the whole idea, I'm not going to do it justice, but the whole idea was to really make connections with our workforce partners, to provide training to them and their employees, but also to do a myriad of other things that addressed sort of across the recommendations. Another one was to have a first-year experience that had a really cool logo, raters. Another was to address the gaps in achievement for some of our students from traditionally underrepresented groups with the Village. Barbara and Laura were both on that team. So really great ideas came out. And at the end of the day, we used our trusty clickers to kind of rate what we thought about. Is it, ready to launch? Do we need to go back to the drawing board? That sort of thing. And so now Mark and his team in IER have taken all of that feedback and all of those ideas and have put them up on the strategic planning website. So you can go and check them out, see what you think, and then there'll be forums held around all the different campuses for employee groups to go and run those ideas. So there might be a couple of those ideas that maybe they didn't get a super high rating on Friday, but that doesn't mean we're not going to address that area, but maybe we need to address it another way. And maybe that WOW idea that came out on Friday can help the rest of us sort of have a starting point to think about how we want to address that particular recommendation. That sort of makes sense? Do you want to add anything to what I just said?
I don't, but there are a number of folks here who were also part of the Strategic Planning Summit. Is there anything any of you would like to add?
I have gotten a couple of emails since then, and people are like, this is really good. They're like, raring to go. And they're like, seriously, we have to wait until December of 2020 to do this? No, we can keep innovating and improving every day in our jobs. You don't have to wait for the strategic plan to be fully baked and printed on paper for us to continue to innovate. And we should be using the ideas that are emerging right now to, test them out, see what works, see what's feasible. I did want to mention one other thing. Hopefully you saw yesterday, we are now eligible to apply for the Aspen Excellence Award, the Aspen Institute Community College Excellence Award. So what that means is we are in the top 150 community colleges in the country, or the top 15% in the country, which we all should be super proud of. And we now are going to scurry. Many of us have to, put it into high speed because the application is due December 5th. And we have Thanksgiving in there. So once again, Mark and his team are energizing us to get this done. And because we're eligible for the Aspen Award, we're also eligible to submit for the STEM Excellence Award, and we can submit 2. So we're submitting 2. So those are also due December 5th. This award actually won't be given until 2021. It's given every other year. So if we make it to the top 10, they'll have a team of people come and visit us, I believe this coming May, which again will be a lot of work to prepare for. But it's also the kind of work that will help us to improve, a lot of self-reflection and self-study and that sort of thing. But it's not unlike preparing for an accreditation visit. Don't everybody gasp at once. We want to be in the top 10. But we're super excited about that, and it's just great to have that kind of recognition for all the hard work that we're already doing. I also wanted to tell you why the male members of executive team are scruffy. They have been challenged by our local AFC chapter to do the No Shave November thing to highlight men's health issues, and they are in it to win it. So that's why they look scruffy. And they're constantly going like this.
I
Another,
did wonder about that, though.
yeah. I actually forgot that they were doing it, and I saw Rick. I was like, "What is going on?"
I've got to shave.
I wanted to bring up one budget item, and then I'm going to ask Rick to do a quick sort of status update on the budget. There have been some questions circulating about Dr. McGee and her current role with the college. So she was on sabbatical for a year, and now she is serving this year through July 31st, 2020 as President Emerita. She holds that title in perpetuity, but this year she's actually on contract with the college. She's engaging in fundraising for us, partnership development, advocacy, all of those, as you know, are like, that's her wheelhouse, very strong in all of those areas. She's also engaging in research and development on a potential emeritus college to keep retirees connected to the college and potentially serve a need in the community. And we amended her contract, I believe, in August. Initially, it had spelled out that she would be paid at the faculty level. That has been amended, so she is making the lowest salary possible to still be an exempt employee, which has accrued budget savings for the institution, which is great. So I know people had questions about that, so I just wanted to clarify in case people didn't see that go through the board. And yes, and this is the last year. I think that she will happily and fully retire on July 31st. No more alarm clocks, flexibility. I don't know that she knew that she would be as interested in that as she is. After, so many years of nose to the grindstone, but she plans on this being her last year on contract with us. Although, of course, she'll always work in support of the college.
Thank you.
Now to Rick.
And trust me, retirement is a good thing. I'm going to get just a very brief overview of what's going on with the budget. I think most of you listened to some of the forums we did earlier in the year. And as you recall, things were kind of tough this year, especially because of the changes in the performance funding. Because of the changes that occurred right at the end of the legislative session, they changed the performance funding model such that we received less money from that. We were gold status, we were just blowing the roof off of the thing, and then they changed all the metrics, and all of a sudden we lost a lot of the money that we were expecting to receive. In fact, we're actually receiving about $2.6 million in performance funding less this year than we did last year. Now, a lot of details on that, I won't get into it, but that's the fact. In fact, the overall state funding this year is down about $813,000. So we were counting on a slight increase in tuition, not the rate, but the actual enrollment. So with the tuition revenues, we were counting on an increase in that to help balance the budget this year. Unfortunately, our enrollment trends are slightly down compared to our budget. So we are now forecasting that we're actually going to be down for the year. There are some changes that may occur, in the spring and the summer that could moderate that somewhat. But right now our forecasting is that we're going to be down, and based on the amount that we're down in the fall, and then kind of extrapolating that out for the rest of the year, we could be down as much as about $2 million for the whole year. So that's kind of where we're at. We as a group are working on some options, developing some options that we can present to the board of some of the things that we can do, some of which we can do this year, some of which we can do for next year to try to start bringing the revenues and the appropriations back together again going forward.
No, and we plan to take some corrective actions to the board for their consideration in January. I believe that meeting is January 21st or thereabouts, whatever that Monday is. So stay tuned for more information, but obviously we can't not take corrective action at this point, so.
Maybe if anyone has any questions on that, let me see if I can address those real quick up front.
Sure.
And if not, we'll move on. Okay, all right, thank you.
It's addition and subtraction, right?
So before we get too far along, could you explain the significance of the Aspen Award for those who are not familiar with it?
So this is a national award. It started, I believe, in 2013, maybe? Pardon? 2011, thank you. So the Aspen Institute looks to community colleges as, you know, a really powerful institution that can change economic and social mobility for those communities and individuals who have typically been underserved in higher education and therefore have less access to, you know, high wage jobs, family sustaining wages, and all of the associated benefits that come from being in a higher economic bracket, better health, you guys know all that. So they said, okay, how can we impact the community college to help it become as excellent as possible nationally? And they've done two major things along those lines. One is they recognize that at the president level, there would be a lot of turnover because of retirement, and that they could impact the presidency by holding the presidential fellowship that they do now every year. The other was this award to recognize excellent institutions. And, you know, the idea is that if they recognize and give money, you know, put their money where their mouth is, it's a $1 million award to the college. If they recognize them and publicize it and hold up the practices of those institutions that are making the most impact on those communities, then other community colleges will strive to do the same. And they do case studies of the top 10 that they then publish and share broadly. And it also brings great recognition to the community colleges as a sector. But this is like the Oscars. This is like an EGOT, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony. Yeah, for a community college. Go ahead.
And they might want to know the dollar amount and also the limitations we have in Florida.
Yes. So it's a $1 million award for the prize. The STEM award is $50,000, $25,000 to the institution or the program, and $25,000 in student scholarships. What was the last thing you said? Florida. Oh, yeah.
Florida rule.
So when they started this, you know, Valencia was the first winner. Or wait, or was it, oh yeah, it was Valencia, and then Santa Fe, and then last year Indian River and Miami-Dade won. Okay, so clearly Florida's like killing it, right? So there's what they have now is the Florida rule. So only 50% of the institutions in a given state can be considered for the top 150. So you're kind of almost at a disadvantage if you're at an institution in Florida, because to break, you need to be in the top half of institutions in Florida. The other thing is they're using publicly available data, which is always at least 2 years in arrears. So we know that we've been gold for the past 2 years, and we're awesome even before that. And we know that our population has gotten more and more diverse over time, and that we're certainly more diverse than our service area. But the data that they're looking at is older than what we're living in today. So it's kind of like they're catching up to our excellence in recognizing it.
And diversity was a huge issue. You have to be invited to apply like we did now. So we never got to be invited because we were always missing that. And now that we have more diverse, but like you said, it's 2 years ago. Now we caught up with that data. So now we showed up in the radar as being, oh, wait a minute, this is a good institution. And they invited us to apply this time. And then on top of that, we had the Florida issue in the past years where only 50%. So yeah. It made it very hard for us to qualify, but now.
That did creep up to the top and was also considered by the Great Colleges Committee is the flexible work time. So I'm going to ask May Ashby to speak on that a little bit. She wasn't expecting this, but that was one of the top concerns that came out of the professional and technical employees group. So could you address?
And it's also a recommendation for the strategic plan.
Yes.
Yes, and it was interesting because at the strategic plan, everyone had the clickers, and it showed 5 different categories of your excitement for this particular initiative. So you can think of a bar graph with 5 bars. One was like, whoop, when it came up. So the message is loud and clear, and we've heard it, and we know that, and we're working on it. We do get requests pretty regularly and have been working informally with supervisors to help them. but we want to put something more formal into place, a policy, a practice, and we are going to be working now with members from the Great Colleges team and getting feedback from supervisors and managers and employees that would want to utilize something like flexible working. It's not for everyone, so obviously our security force can't really work from home per se, obviously, but they could still have some flexible arrangements within that. Their shift may be different than the person's, working next to them. So there's lots of opportunity, but a one size does not fit all.
In particular was how can professional and technical employees establish relationships with students when many of us are not student-facing or not in student-facing positions. So what I've facing, or some of you, I should say, not in student-facing positions, what do you do to establish this idea of a relationship approach to student success? How do you utilize that or implement that, and what recommendations or suggestions would you have for professional and technical employees?
I want to just start by saying I think this is one of the themes that really came through in the Strategic Planning Summit on Friday. There was a lot of discussion about being less transactional and more relational, and also really the idea of building community with students, whether we use something like the meta majors to build academic communities, or there was this idea about the village to make all students feel, I think our goal is to make all students feel that they are an important part of an academic community. And I think that each of us can do things every day in our interactions with students or in interactions with each other to sort of promote that. And I think sort of what it comes down to for a student is they don't want to feel like a number. They don't want to feel like, they're a customer at a store kind of thing. They want to feel like they're a part of something bigger, and that sense of belonging is really important. And when we were talking about it during the summit, it really reminded me of something that Dr. Harris brought up in his workshops on Convocation Day about, he gave us some strategies, and one of them was to hold unconditional positive regard for students and to really hold very high expectations. And I think in some ways having a more relational approach with students or towards student success really has a lot to do, it's attitudinal, not necessarily always just in the actions that you take, and that really make a difference. And in the earlier exchange of views with career service, we were talking about how students don't really know that I'm not the person to talk to about enrolling, and that Laura's not the person to talk to about where Building L is, but they just see us all as resources. So even if you're not student facing, you probably often have the opportunity to interact with students just on a day-to-day basis. And for me, I think it's really important that we think about not just promoting access and like our doors are ready, come on in, but that we really act with intent. And whether you're in HR, engaging in training or employee development or whatever your role might be, there are ways that you can act with intention around that. And I think, again, that sense of community and also doing everything we do at the college with care also can really help to promote the relational versus transactional kind of atmosphere for students and for each other. I think it's important. We can't build community for students if we don't have community amongst ourselves. So I think that's a big part of it as well.
So a lot of the discussion in my particular group on Friday, Strategic Planning Summit, was around how we can be accountable to a student. So along the same lines as Dr. Lorenz just described, make the connections with other departments yourselves so that even if you're not the expert on something that a student asks you, you know of an expert who can assist that student. And going to the intent, you just need to be really intentional about helping students. They see a badge and they think that you know everything about this college because they probably know a quarter of what you know or nothing, you know, so you have to kind of be their guide through the college system, and I think that's making your own kind of departments, but other people that you know around the college, so that you don't just refer them, but you can actually advocate for them with another group. And I think that's really important. I would say with my team, we are privileged to be able to go to a lot of student events. And so I would just suggest, if you do have time in your schedule, to actually go to students where they are, whether it's an event at the student center or volunteering off campus or whatever it is. Those informal conversations that you can have with students are very important in helping you see their journey and their experience.
In our last session with career service, we talked about how all of us are responsible in some way for getting students to graduation. And so you're always welcome at graduation. We could figure out a way to do that. Someone said, you know, gosh, we really need help with decision day. You know, if you could come help with that. There's lots of other opportunities that you would interact with students. Faculty have been talking about, is there a mentoring role that we can set up that they could help mentor students? And certainly for all of you, that might be an opportunity too.
I would add, be visible. That's important. And remember our experience. Most of us were college students at some point. So remember some of the challenges and opportunities we had and what helped us to get where we are. And just be open to listen. And so I think students know when you're genuine. They know when you care. And be that resource is important. But don't forget your experience and how you made it through. And you can help someone else by just sharing your experience a lot of times.
And one other quick comment, I think for those of us who are not always student-facing, having the attitude of supporting those who are, I think that's a big thing, because that's why we're here, for students to learn. And as long as we all kind of keep that in mind, that every job here is important and supports those people that are on the front lines working with students. So as long as we have the right attitude about it.
Yeah, I can't echo that enough, that if we aren't student-facing, our responsibility is to support our colleagues so that they can do their jobs with the students more efficient, quicker, faster, better, all of those things. As I'm looking around the room, most of this audience, at least in person, does get to interact with students quite frequently. That's just the nature of your job. As I'm looking around, this is actually the minority of this room does not. I see like purchasing and finance, payroll, HR. Those groups don't, you know, have that same opportunity. And so I think it's important for those areas to get involved in things like Point the Way, which many of you do. And some of you could be the Point the Way ambassador for all that you do. I'm looking at Greg Long. But that's how you do it. And as leaders, that's why I wanted to give you all a little bit different message. Many of you lead other staff, and that you set that tone for your department, for your area, that you want people to get involved in some of these events. Because we heard from our career service folks earlier this morning, they're yearning for that. And so please create that environment for them, that you want them to go out and maybe see a theater play this weekend, or you want them to go see a planetarium show, or go to the Hispanic festival over the weekend, or, you know, I could go on and on and on, a speaker series event. I mean, there's just so many ways you can get involved, invested, and then that really helps the operations where some of the departments I named, you can work anywhere, but this is what makes it special to work here. You know, if you worked at Home Depot, they're not going to put on Midsummer's Night in the, you know, in their, you know, bar.
The sets would probably be amazing.
Yeah. The sets would be cool, but you know, they're not going to do that. They're not going to bring in people from different political sides of the spectrum and have a great debate. That's why we work here, because we get to be a part of such neat things, and then see our students and graduate and become wonderful citizens of our community. that's why we work here, and it's so special. So as leaders, please help us create that energy and that excitement within your departments.
Can I just do a shameless plug, because we're always looking for volunteers for President's and Dean's List reception that happens every semester. Graduation, contact us and welcome to come and volunteer. Dream Gala is February 29th. I'm looking for volunteers. And then also, President's and Dean's List is going to be February 11th, this coming.
And it
so
is
we already have
awesome.
those 2 dates, yes.
Try to make it easier for those who do home for, but our goal is to make it easier for you. And we're going to initiate a project in the next couple of months that is going to make it even easier for students to access their applications, hopefully for the spring semester, middle of the summer. When we close the doors in our labs, that doesn't mean they won't be able to use the hardware or software that exists in those labs. So they can go anywhere on the planet and access that. And the same for the employees. Hopefully you'll take advantage of that. You'll hear more about it, but it's coming up. We're going to go to the board hopefully in December, but it's going to be pretty cool. It's a cool project, and I think it's going to help everybody, students and employees, do their job better.
I think
Thank
that
you.
sort of serves as evidence of the ethos here that good is never good enough for our students. And behind the scenes, CTS and other departments, they're thinking up, you know, what's the best way to serve students, not, okay, we've served them, they've gotten access to the software, okay, we're done. You know, we really strive to get to that next level and make it as easy for students as possible. Think about the flexibility that they need, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that also speaks to not just being transactional, you don't just give them the software
Correct.
in the easiest way, but more relational, thinking about the conditions that students and circumstances that they're dealing with, and how can we best serve those students, regardless of what our role might be.
So at this time, I'd like to ask if any of our board members have comments or questions, and we will open it up to the audience as well.
I have a comment. I would be remiss if I didn't mention On Your Radar, which is a newsletter that's sent out once a semester, because we want you all to have an opportunity to find ways to get engaged, because if we are, our students will be. And so I'm also working on an employee engagement webpage listing these different types of opportunities. So part of being engaged is making sure that you have that balance. I know we work tirelessly to serve our students and our faculty and our staff, but take time for professional development, take time to go socialize. When you come to things like this is when you get information, this is when you make those connections Dr. Lorenz was talking about. So make sure that you're taking time to take care of yourself as well, so that we can take care of our students.
Do we have any comments or questions from the audience? Yes.
Wait for the microphone, please.
Can you give us an update about what's happening at the Altamont property?
Okay. So to do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the priorities, I guess, from the state level when it comes to building. So we put in our capital improvement plan what we call Building B at Altamont. We, keep putting it in there, but there's a strong desire, particularly on the House side, to finish previously funded projects that are not yet fully funded, like Building L. So our priority this year is to get that darn $5 million, that last installment for Building L. And it's very unlikely that we would get even the first allocation for a B building at Altamont. It's way down on the ranked list from the Department of Ed, essentially because it's new. Last year, Senate Bill 190 also impacted the way in which those projects get ranked. So Building L has been in the top 2 for the last 3 years and not gotten that last bit of funding. This year we actually fell to number 12 because of the characteristics of Senate Bill 190. However, I've been up there knocking on every door saying we are the poster child for exactly what you have said your priority is, previously funded, not completed. We are the oldest project on the list. So I'm hopeful that that will be addressed, which will certainly help our capital fund immensely, because we're in not great shape right now, because last year our repair and maintenance money was swept and diverted to charter schools. They also have expressed, I think this is both on the House and Senate side, that colleges and universities are overbuilt. And even though it's baked into Senate Bill 190, and that's why we lost points, if you're adding square footage, they're saying they don't want to build new things at colleges and universities. So that's obviously another strike against a new building at Altamont. Have been told from the state, and I forget already the name of the statute or whatever, that we can't tear down those automotive buildings because it's been deemed that it would cost less to remodel them than to rebuild them. What's it called again?
It's the a Castaldi analysis.
The Castaldi analysis. Aha! So that's another sort of, I mean, it could be a limiting factor, or if we remodel those buildings, that could be a potential answer at Altamont. Right now, we are engaging in sort of, well, Altamont is a little bit of a mystery, because we have a lot of options that we could pursue, but pursuing any of those options is really challenging. So pursuing state funding, very challenging. Pursuing private development, there are also a lot of limitations on the way we can and cannot engage in public-private partnerships. So on November 18th, we're having a capital planning workshop with the board and talking through, all the different priorities that we have, and Altamont is one of them. We don't have an answer at this point, so what we may recommend to the board is hiring somebody to help us figure this out so that we have a long-term strategy for that property that serves our needs in a financially responsible and feasible way. So, yes.
Is it legal to just sell it?
I think
Repeat the question so the people.
Deb asked, is it legal to sell it outright? Yes, that money would go back into capital, so it would not be available for operations. It would have to go into capital. So one option to think about is how can we utilize that property to generate revenue to meet our space needs? And that's something that we need expertise to help us figure out. And a potential would be that it wouldn't generate sufficient revenue to build the building that we need. So that's certainly a question that we still need to figure out. Rick, do you want to say anything?
No, I
or
think you
correct
covered
anything
it.
I've said?
Yeah, there are more questions than there are answers right now on that property. So we're going to talk to the board, try to get some direction, and then I think what you suggested is hiring a professional team. There are teams of organizations who do planning, this type of planning. So they go in and they actually analyze all of the various options of how the property can be used, and then they will determine what the most optimal combination of, it's like office, retail, all of that type of stuff. And then they will determine whether or not utilizing that property in that manner will generate sufficient revenues to accomplish your purposes. What is it that you need on that property, meaning the whole Altamont site? And then they will help determine whether or not we can accomplish what we need to do through a public-private partnership. Sometimes they come back and they say, well, you can do this, this, and this, but you're still not going to be able to pay for this. So at the end of the day, the answer may be we still can't accomplish everything. So then we have to determine, excuse me, do we modify what we're willing to accept on that property as far as our educational needs, or do we just wait and see if we can come up with a better idea?
One of the frustrations is going through the strategic planning process and looking at all the data that the SOAR team looked at, et cetera, we know that there is strong need in the Altamont area. That's a dense population, and within 5-mile radius of the campus, only 30% of the population has a baccalaureate degree. So offering more general ed there would be a priority. but right now we just don't have a whole lot of space to work with to do that. We'd also like to expand nursing if we could. And that requires stuff and space to do it. And if we expand nursing, then that's even less space for general education. So it's kind of like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. Dick also just prompted me to talk a little bit about our student housing project. So we sent out our RFPs to say, come one, come all, give us your best ideas. We are now in receipt of those proposals, right, Greg? Oh, not yet. We changed the timeline, so they're due on the 12th. So we have a selection committee that will review all of those proposals and interview, the ones that they're most interested in, and that project continues to move forward. Our goal or our hope is that it will be something in the neighborhood of 500 student beds on college-owned property or foundation-owned property here at Sanford Lake Mary.
And just a quick point, the idea behind this is that the college would not commit any financial resources to
we
that.
can't.
That there would be a totally private organization who would handle the financing, the construction, and the management of at least that's the concept of the housing, so that the college would not have to commit resources towards that.
Because we can't use state dollars for student housing. And this is actually a tried and true example of public-private partnerships. Universities do this all the time. So this isn't quite as out of the box as some of the things that we initially were going to try at Altamont. Greg, jump in.
The one thing I want to just clarify really quickly is if anyone on campus gets questions, tell them to call me.
Yes.
Do not tell them to call Dr. Lorenz or anybody on the board. Tell them to call me, because the cone of silence is out there at this point in time, the solicitation.
Yeah, 'cause ultimately I will be
One more
involved.
thing, the idea is that this will generate revenue, a constant revenue stream to the college, and that's also, they have to give us gotta pay us rent for having the space.
Yeah, it's like a
So-
ground lease.
So, and the people have done it already in the college, it's a couple of colleges having, they're generating as much as $1 million a year back to them. So it's an additional source of revenue that we hope that we end up with, that we can reinvest back into our students and employees or whatever we want to do. Typically, those contracts go as much as 50 to 100, which is great. But anyway, just to let you know, the goal is to try to generate additional revenue for the college.
Can I ask a question about that? Because I'm struggling with my incoming exchange students who in the spring semester, I don't have as many of them, and so they have to, depending on how many there are, and this year, this coming semester, I only had 2. One dropped off because they have to share the cost of entire rent. So because that one dropped out, now the other one has to bear the brunt of it. I'm hoping that as you're looking at this, you're looking at cost per bed, not cost per apartment, and how many people are in the apartment. Because
Are these ELI students who aren't here for
no,
full
these
year?
are our international partnerships through global engagement, that the incoming exchange partnership students
Okay.
come in, and I'm working with the apartment complex nearby, but they charge the rent.
Right.
And I try to put 4 students in each apartment because that way they can afford it. But if I only have 2 and then one drops off, that one student has to pay the entire rent.
Yeah.
And so it becomes $6,400 for a semester, which is impossible.
So that there is no student housing in Seminole County. That's different than apartments. Student housing is exactly what you just said. So there could be 3 beds in a room, you pay for that bed, as opposed to pay for the whole apartment.
We can say perfect, but we do need to review the proposals to make
Correct.
sure
What
that
I'm saying
you
is-
know.
Well, I guess what
That's
I'm
we
saying
told.
is, with the proposals that you get, if you could keep that in mind, because they can't afford it
Barbara,
otherwise.
the proposal went out to be a student housing, and that's how student housing works. And a lot of the people we visited and gone over to colleges and universities, that's exactly how it works. That's what we're looking at the proposals, and if somebody proposed something different, then that may be points that get removed from there. But our goal is to make it affordable for students international students, for athletes. Right now, athletes, they're not having to share a room. So the goal is to go per bed. So if there's 2 people in the apartment, it's 3 beds. The 2 people pay only for their bed. So, which is what student housing works.
Morgan?
Yeah. So how does the addition of the housing, is it seen as an off-site thing or more of an on-site as far as impacting service provision? So I come from previously here, a residential college where you would expect increases in canteen hours, library hours, tutoring hours. Are those things seen as being impacted by the new housing, or is that yet to be determined?
I think it's yet to be determined. Some colleges who've done this, like Daytona College, I talked to their president, they have a meal plan available to students. We don't have that. So we would need for these apartments to have kitchens so that, you know. So I would say overall, and I don't know, we'll have to measure sort of the impact of 500 students. And you know, if this is successful and we decide to move forward, maybe there's some tipping point at which it does impact services. Did you want to add, Greg?
No, I was just going to say that we would not be running it. That's what our desire is, that someone else is going to be running this
Yes.
other than the college. So.
Although I do fully understand, even if we're not managing it, it's still, it's going to be
Oh, yes,
changed.
impactful.
I grew up in residential life, like, you know, the beginning of my career. It could be a challenge.
Yep. And at this point, the RFP is open, so we can't tell you what we want or don't want. We just told people, give us your best shot. Location, how to run it, how to fund it, and we're not putting any restrictions. We kind of left it open for that reason. You know, hopefully the people who do this for a living will know what to do.
And I will add, it fits well while we're here. Our students are having housing insecurity. We know that. So whatever we can do to make sure we drive our students to completion, and sometimes having that available can make a difference. And so I think that's important as well.
Other questions?
Just to let you know that the committee is meeting on January the 8th at 1 p.m. Just to,
Welcome to join us.
correct.
In the boardroom,
In the
right?
boardroom, that's correct.
Good. Randy?
You folks have already mentioned some of the budget challenges that we have for this year, and I believe we're able to go into reserves to pull a little bit of money out of there, but we're reaching kind of the end of that. So how do things look for next fiscal year if we're kind of struggling a bit this year to make ends meet?
They look about the same. So from the legislative angle again, we don't anticipate a huge influx of money from the state this year. The Department of Ed and, have I already told you this? And the Council of Presidents, for the first time, our legislative budget request is exactly the same. I feel like I'm repeating myself. Okay. So there's a new funding model that's been cooked up that will be easier to understand and hopefully easier to sell to anybody. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, and there are new elements in it. The problem is that they're not putting a lot of new money into this new model. So for us, we'll probably walk away with less than $1 million additional as a result of it. But things that are, you know, act as these elements include a base student allocation and trying to reach some sort of equity in funding amongst colleges that are of similar size in terms of FTE. Growth, so obviously enrollment is always an issue, and the more we can grow, the more we could generate state revenue and obviously the tuition and fees. And then there's a workforce component that could be very important for us if they put more money into it, because we are the most comprehensive college in the state, and we offer, I think, they were looking at head count. 46% of our head count is enrolled in our workforce programs, and we make up a greater proportion of the workforce head count when you look at us across the whole state than we do just for our FTE. And so we would get sort of like a bonus because those are the most expensive programs to run. You know, they need lots of equipment, and that equipment needs to be maintained, and there's a lower faculty to student ratio. So they're kind of trying to recognize that those are higher cost programs. They're only putting $8 million in pot, which means about $400,000 for us. So again, it's not going to have a huge impact on our budget this next year, but you could kind of see the potential is there. So then we could go back to the governor and the legislature and say, okay, you're prioritizing workforce education. That's what we do. Put $100 million in there. If, you know, put your money where your mouth is. So there'll be levers that we can push and pull on this funding model going forward, but it's not necessarily, it's not saving the day. So I anticipate next year will be similar to this year. The other thing is this performance funding. The person who's kind of like the architect of it told me that it's still a work in progress. So it's really hard to not know how we're going to be evaluated and what kind of funding that's going to bring us. You know, we're sort of working in the dark in that sense. I was happy that he said it's still a work in progress because right now it's really just based on number. 80% of the formula is how many number of students passed math class X, for example. Well, if I'm Miami-Dade, let's say I get 30% of the students through this year, and next year I have more students and I still only get, let's say I only get 29% through, but because I had a larger pool that I was drawing from, I'm still getting rewarded for performance. I said, no, 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 that's not performance, that's enrollment. So I hope that if more college presidents are advocating in that way, that you know, the proportion will be considered and your performance against your, you know, being judged against your own prior performance as well as the system will get put back into the formula because that's where we shine. And it's so frustrating right now. We lost $2.6 million. So many of our indicators are actually better than they were last year. We outperformed ourselves and we lost money. That is not a performance funding formula. But again, we're kind of operating in the dark on that because we don't exactly know how we'll be judged.
You mind if I say a little bit of a politically incorrect statement?
He's about to retire.
I'm leaving so I can say what I want, right? No, the fact is that tuition has been frozen at the 2011-12 levels, and we have not had an increase in tuition for all this time. So the legislature theoretically is making that up by additional state resources. That's not true. That's not happening. And so at some point they're going to have to realize, well, you know, small increases in tuition, you know, indexed to consumer price index or something may be necessary to help fund colleges appropriately into the future. So I hope they consider that into the future. They're not considering
constraints that the college is going to do at a higher level. So you talked about the budget being the same for next year. So what is the college as a whole going to do to kind of save some money and maybe move things into operations? You said that there was a meeting coming up to talk about that, but could you share any about that up front?
We're working on that right now, so I don't have anything specific to share right now, but we will be presenting to the board in January some of those strategies because they're going to need to amend the budget based on our current forecast, or potentially amended. I guess it depends on our strategies. So at this point, we're taking any and all suggestions or ideas, but we're working through that process now. Maybe. Yes, Alana.
It sounds like funding is going to be the same pretty much. Is there any plan to have some kind of partnership with UCF for employees to be able to advance to further degrees? Some kind of tuition, something worked out for where employees can pursue higher degrees at UCF?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's a really good idea.
Yeah. No, but that is a good idea. You know, we still do have our staff and program development funds that, you know, that can be used for reimbursement of tuition reimbursement. So, yeah, partially, yeah. So, but yeah, that's a good idea.
So, Dr. Ross, you just mentioned SPD funds. I mean, so that process has changed over the past year or so with the dissolving of the committee. Would you mind explaining a little bit how the new, is there a change of how we apply for that, or is it the same process in that case?
Slightly, and I have my pal May here to back me up. She's also part of this process. Slightly. We have 4 SPD contacts, and it's based on what division you're in. So in academic affairs, Patty Boyle is the SPD contact. And so it's pretty much the same paperwork. We may have adjusted it a little bit, but it's the same process, only it would go to Patty. And we review to ensure that when you've applied for SPD funding, whether it's travel or tuition reimbursement, that you're eligible, you've been here long enough, and that you still have funding left. It's still the $2,500 limit for both. And as long as you have that and I review it, in academic affairs, we sign off and it's done. So and we email pretty quickly. Those of you that have applied, perhaps you've gotten those emails to let you know you either have been funded or have not been. Want to add anything, May?
Yes, if I can just touch on that for a moment. Has anyone utilized SPD so far this year since August in this room? Okay. How was the process for you?
Yeah,
That's
simple. I mean, Suzanne, yeah, not much change. Suzanne is I mean, I literally walked into her office yesterday and I said, I need this. And I mean, it was a lot quicker process. It
Great.
felt like a lot quicker.
Great. Great. Well, that was the intent, is for our users, for our employees, to have a much quicker process, a simpler process, and have that committee. If were any of you on the SPD committee, either in years past or current? Okay. So that is a very talented group of people. People that are attracted to that kind of work usually are really invested in advancing employees and all of the good things that come with career development, professional development. So we really want that group to work this year. And when I say that group, they might disperse and do different things, but those talents to work on something that will really help move the institution forward. So that was really the intent. So I'm glad to hear from users that is happening. It was also to save money, because sometimes you would be waiting on a request for perhaps 60 days. Well, we all know the price of airline tickets will go up over that time. You might miss out on like the early bird rate. That might jump up a couple $100s. So we really wanted to save money, be good stewards of the college's funds, and also help our users with a more efficient process. Excuse me, I did just want to add, if someone's filling out the paperwork and the answer is ever no for a reason, I wanted everyone to know that that's not made level, that we would talk to each other to make sure that we're all on the same page with if we say no to an employee. Because we really believe in professional development can be quite broad. So that was an important commitment that we give back to our employees as well. It could happen, it's very rare, but for example, I'll just use an example. If you wanted professional development to go like to a pet grooming class, maybe on the weekends, that, don't get me wrong, because I love animals and they need to be groomed, okay? Some don't at all, but you know, that's something that's important, but it's just not really related back to the business and the success of the college. So we may say no on that.
And there's a lot to go on behind the scenes once you turn in that paperwork. So we've tried to make it as transparent as possible. We had some hiccups along the way, but now I think we've got the smooth process going now. So.
And on the subject of people wanting to go for other qualifications or other degrees, in addition to obviously the Direct Connect program through UCF, we have partnerships with Complete Florida. So employees as well as students are welcome to apply for those programs, and they offer scholarships. If you take a program completely online, they offer scholarships which become greater as you move towards the end of your program. So that's another option for employees as well as students. And UF Online is a new partner as well. So again, if you have an AA and you want to take an online bachelor's degree in certain subjects, they offer those again to employees as well as students.
That question, I think, was also about graduate level degrees and credentials. So, but do any of our partners address those at this level?
I'm not sure if Complete Florida might, but UF Online is just a baccalaureate program at the moment.
And our BSIT program does matriculate. We have with Florida State's IT cybersecurity, I think, or something like that. So that's another option as well.
To the masters?
Yep, to their masters.
Yeah, and construction too, at UF and Lynn University, I think, for a couple of our degrees. Yeah. Yeah.
I know that we just went through a review for insurance not too long ago, but
You mean benefits?
health insurance, yeah, health insurance. But coming from corporate world, it seems a little odd that all of our employees don't need to have any financial buy-in. For example, yes, it costs you $50, but you can very easily get the $50 back. It just seems like if we're looking at budgets with health insurance rates, that there ought to be some type of premium that the employee bears on a sliding scale based on their pay. But I think we're way behind the times and not charging our employees anything at all. And from what I've heard, people with families don't even pick up the insurance because it's so outrageously expensive. So if there's a way to offset some of that with us picking up premiums for ourselves, that family insurance wouldn't be so expensive, that might be a good opportunity to look at for saving budget money and also helping out our fellow employees. And I don't have any kids or family. I'd be willing to pay a premium.
Okay, so do we have a couple hours? This is a very, very complex issue, okay? We had a committee of about 15 people working on this topic for about 18 months. And as those of you that know that have been here, because if you're new, you wouldn't know the difference. But if you've been here, you knew that for 50 years, we didn't charge employees for their own health care. Families is a different issue, but for their own, we did not charge. The college picked up that cost. You mentioned, you kind of compared that to the private sector. The challenges, because I come from the private sector, so I'm very well aware, it's a different model in the private sector. What the private sector traditionally does is the employee only pay quite a bit more, usually about 30, it depends on your corporate philosophy, but let's just say 30%, and that does help offset the cost of family care. Here in higher education, all of the 28 colleges, it's the exact opposite. You fund, and it's, we looked at the history of it. It's really, it's interesting from a sociological perspective. The reason it was set up that way is back when it was a junior college or a teacher's college, it was that earner was just needing insurance for themselves. That's kind of the history of it, and it just never went away over 50 years. So all of the 28 colleges are really set up that way. You take care of the employee, and then the family is left really on their own. So in order to switch that model, it would be a significant change for employee-only coverage. And having gone through the change to now have employees participate in their coverage, whether it be you're thinking a small amount, some other people didn't feel that way. So again, I'm balancing everyone's viewpoint on that. So we do have about, I think the last time I looked, about 200 employees that don't participate at all in our wellness program. It's a voluntary program, so you do not have to participate. There's no judgment if you choose not to do so for whatever reason. There's all kinds of reasons. But those 200 people, Deb, they do have to purchase their own health insurance. Mind you, it's that cost of 30, 50, or 70. But they do participate. And then you've got about 500 plus employees that participated in the wellness program to some degree. But even so, some people still want the $70 plans. You can actually look at our benefits, and we're, I think, doing really well, at least taking some initial steps, because what was happening is the rate of our benefits was increasing like this, and the rate of our raises were going like this, our compensation. And you don't want that to happen. You want the compensation to be much more and the benefits to be like this. So we've flattened that out and feel really good about that. I hear your thoughts, but it would take quite a bit of organizational change to look at a different model of cost ownership, number one. And number two, I'm a real big believer in change in small increments. I mean, I can be outvoted. I mean, the board can certainly outvote me. Dr. Lorenz can outvote me, but change in small increments for our employees. And so they're just now getting used to this. I think they need time to absorb that before we continue to add change on top of change on top of change. The other thing that I always talk about in tandem with our benefits, they go hand in hand. It's total compensation. We print out, everybody gets a one-page document every year with what's your total comp situation, because it's not just dollars in pay. And please remember that we made a philosophical choice to pay 85% of the market because we have these rich benefits. So if we change our benefits at all, I'm going to have to advocate that we change our pay. And I know the budget situation. We don't have any resources to do that. So that's why I said, do you have a couple hours? It's very complex. It's not a simple answer, but I do see my role as being an advocate for the employee and helping educate people about how complex it is. And that it's not just, because sometimes it's very easy for a board member or a community member to say, well, I work at Target and we have to pay $150 a month. Why are you only paying $30? Let's sit down, I'll walk you through that. Let's look at your compensation. Let's look at your leave. Let's look at, it's a total package, and it's not apples to apples always. So sorry to bore you all.
If you were able to look at the document that has already been posted online, if you have some suggestions, ideas, or recommendations for the executive team to consider, then now would be a time and an opportunity to bring those up as well. Because one of the things I've shared is that I feel like we're at an ideal time, in our college's history where, based on a number of circumstances and information that we have and all of the great ideas that are coming forward, particularly with the initiative to look forward for our strategic planning for 2020 through 2025, that now is the opportunity and the ideal time to put really any idea out there, because you never know what idea, recommendation, or suggestion might be the wow idea to really push us forward. So are there any comments, concerns, questions, recommendations, suggestions, something that you've been holding on to for a while that you'd like to share now with the executive team?
Or later, you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
Just think about it.
Yes.
Microphone, please.
I'm usually loud, so that's. But it would probably just be ideas for revenue contributions. I know it probably has to be, SACS accredited, etc. But one was, what are we allowed to do with our auto center? A part of me sometimes wonders if I need my brakes checked or my tires rotated. I would gladly pay a small fee to have you guys do it versus going to Walmart, Sears, etc. Another thing is, many, many years ago, when you had early childhood education development and programs of such, you would have an on-site daycare center for them to get hands-on experiential learning activities. I'm curious to know, how can we go back to certain models like that where, maybe a full-timer who needs daycare assistance can have an aftercare program. I don't mind contributing that money directly to who I work for versus someone who is private as well, in addition to possibly building partnerships with the community. And so as far as letting someone with a national brand, for instance, come in and let them, oversee some operations as far as the risk, but we get to oversee the curriculum part. And I think that was it for those two.
Thank you.
Yeah, the daycare idea has come up in a
Commission meeting, one of the county commissioners was talking about, they had surveyed all the county employees about some of their needs and some of their issues, and I think daycare came up there as well. So I think there's some dialogue that's going on in the community through the county employees, through the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, through Seminole County Public Schools, and even here at Seminole State College about what if in terms of that. Again, it's a big discussion and a topic that I think we could bring some folks together to have some further dialogue on, but it has come up a couple different ways. And so I've kind of taken a little bit of it too to say, what could we do in that arena?
I will say my former college that I was at before coming here, we were in the process of opening a daycare center in collaboration with the city, and we would have, there was sort of like an observation area for our students to engage this early childhood students, and then also they did their practicum there, or that was the plan. It is more complicated than it seems on its face, and like the liability concerns and the kid to teacher ratios and all
Space.
Yes, it's very complicated. But even if we don't own the project, that might be something that we could partner on the project. And, if we had land to give, something. So I'm not saying no, I'm just saying it is complicated.
I can tell you that if Jan Lloyd were here, she'll tell you everything about it, because we were looking for it for our students, and we did the entire analysis a few years ago. And it's extremely complicated. There's specific requirements for space. You have to have a little playground. You have to have liability. I mean, it is super complicated. And the college has to put in a lot of, even if it's in our property and we don't run it, just because it's in our property, then it goes back to the insurance consortium. They have to fund it. So there's a lot of things related to that. And our students were asking for that as well, because they too have the need. So it's something that's been around for quite a few years.
It's nice to know that the need, that the county and others are talking about this as well, because I think it would be ripe for partnership. So, yeah.
I would agree there. My last institution, similar, we had 4 on each one of our campuses, but partnership is the way to go if there's some conversation around there. Because to Dick and Dr. Lorenz's point, a lot of work has to be done around that. Nutrition is a whole nother animal there.
Is that it?
I just want to add the information from the strategic plan is already posted on the website. So if you don't have the ideas now, go read that stuff. There's a couple of things that surface to the top, and if there are any ideas to any of them, even not the ones in the top, just let us know, and we'll definitely consider those.
And I don't know if I already said this because I've been talking a lot today, but Mark and company will take the show on the road, so there'll be opportunities for you to engage in open forums and talk about those ideas and put forward your own. And this is, going to continue to evolve until we take it to the board next fall.
Just gonna put this out here, I guess, since we're still, looking for things to talk about, fielding from the audience. As an audience member, or a board member, and we're talking about strategic planning. We're thinking about the future, very future focused. I want to kind of float out there as something in the kind of background or the mindset of this is that we keep the words sustainability and resilience mind. So long-term thinking as a major theme of this. So this past Friday, per my understanding, looking at the working groups, a lot of it is particular program development or student retention focused. But in terms of the broad, how we look at the college, I don't know whether this is a thing where in the future one of our core values, for example, might be something along this line. But that's something that while we're in this time of thinking about the future, I want to float that out as something that we really need to consider.
Well, if we don't have any other questions or comments for professional and technical employees, we are planning a meeting for December 17th, for the morning of December 17th. So that'll be another opportunity to share and to network with your colleagues. We will provide refreshments at the meeting on December 17th. We are planning a morning or mid-morning meeting for that day. So do keep in mind that you are and have access to everyone here. So feel free to submit or share your ideas, comments, questions, or concerns. And if there is something that you would like the P-TECH board in particular to consider, feel free to let us know. Thank you all for coming out. I hope you have a great day and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you, everybody.